It's weekly download time. 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 And now we're going to learn some stuff. Oh yeah! Welcome to the weekly download, everyone. This is a very exciting episode of the weekly download because we are going to be leaving the beaten path of electronic music and journeying off into the study of Steve Reich, arguably the greatest living American composer, one of my favorite musicians of all time. His pioneering work in minimalism in the 60s and beyond was completely groundbreaking in so many ways that his compositional techniques are still being used today by some of the biggest electronic music acts are still using compositional techniques that he pioneered in the 60s, writing for ensembles where he was inspired by tape loops and other mechanical phenomenon, and was inspired by gamelan music. You may remember from a couple weeks ago when we were studying collision and mallet instruments, we were exploring gamelan music and the kind of like overlapping moire patterns sort of things that happen when you have two or more of the same part playing against each other. Well, Steve Reich, he discovered some of these phenomenon working with tape loops, where in the early days of sampling, there were no samplers, right? Like if you listen to Doctor Who, the theme song for Doctor Who, for example, which you may recall. Here, I'll play it here. Right, so that loop, that that was created with tape. That's not a sampler. That's a very groundbreaking piece of music composed for the BBC, where they basically got a whole bunch of taped notes and they pitched the note to different lengths, and they literally like cut it with scissors. And they had all the C's on one hook and all the C sharps on another hook and all the D's on another hook. And they would splice together these pieces of tape to form a loop that would go round and round and round. So, a normal tape is a loop that's like 30 minutes long, right? But these tape loops are shorter, and you create them by cutting and splicing the tape together. There's a whole scene of people who work with tape loops. It's very, very cool. Yeah, tape tapping from the Open Reel Ensemble. There are still people doing cool modern things with tape music today. Very cool. You should also check out a guy named Heinbach. He is a YouTuber who is really into doing things with tape loops, and he creates a lot of rhythm tracks for modular synthesizer work with tape loops, where he'll splice them together like this.
done with the little stuff. So now it's time to splice all these together. I'm thinking I'm gonna use this block because the tape will hold in there automatically. Like.
But yeah, you can get some pretty cool sounds with tape loops. But this is a tradition that started very, very early on. Some of the very first electronic music was made with tape loops. And Steve Reich was one of the first people to really get into making tape loop music. And when he was working with these tape loops, he discovered a phenomenon that he calls melodic phasing. You know, phasing. We think of phasing, you know, as regards a sound wave going up and down, right? So like, so let's look up a video of wave phase here. Wave phase. Oh no, not weave phase. Wave phase. Yeah, so we typically, us electronic musicians, we typically think of wave phasing, where you have, you know, a repeating cycle of a sound wave that goes up and down with with 0 volts in the middle. Positive voltage would be represented by going upwards, and a negative voltage would be represented by going downwards. And there's an amplitude and a period of the wave, right? But you can also think of phase in terms of the tape loop, right? In terms of how long it takes the tape loop to go around. And fun fact, the flange effect that we all know and love also came from tape loop music. And basically, if you had two identical tape loops going together, you could touch the flange, meaning the edge of the tape machine, and slow slightly one of the tape loops relative to the other, and that would slowly put them in and out of phase. Not in terms of how the waveform goes up and down, but in terms of the phase of the tape loop, right? So Steve Reich, he composed this piece called It's Gonna Rain, where he has two tape machines, and he's essentially DJing these two tape machines together. He's made a recording of a preacher in Union Square in San Francisco, and this was like during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and everybody thought the world was going to end. So he was really like, "Oh my God, this apocalyptic preacher talk was really speaking to him." And he made a recording and experimented with two different copies of this recording playing on top of each other, right? Exploring the stasis of it. You know, we're used to music moving around and having like phrases and chord changes and all of these different sorts of movements, right? But Steve Reich was much more interested in stasis. What happens when we stay in the same thing and explore subtle variations of the same thing, subtle variations of repetition? What happens then? What happens to the mind of the listener when we do this? So I want you to listen to this, and this is not going to be. This is a pretty challenging piece of music even today. It's composed in 1965, and you know, a lot of people were like, "That's just not music," blah 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 blah. But over time, this piece has come to be appreciated as a really groundbreaking work of composition. So I want you to listen to it, and I want you to hear, you know, when it goes from being a mono recording to stereo to two copies of the tapes, where they're offset, one in the left ear, one in the right ear, and they're moving against each other. And just listen to the kind of psychoacoustic phenomenon that happens. So I'm going to turn my mic off. I'm going to play this, and I want you to now enjoy Steve Reich's It's Gonna Rain from 1965.
He began to warn the people. He said, after a while, it's going to rain after a while, for 40 days and for 40 nights. And the people didn't believe him. And they began to laugh at him. And they began to mock him. And they began to say, it ain't going to rain. It's gonna rain, 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 it's gonna 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 it's
Yeah, so yeah, you can see this is a very very avant-garde piece of music even today. And it's still, even though it was in the 60s, it still sounds, you know, pretty challenging. And as you can hear you can hear it go from being a mono recording to opening up into stereo, and the drifts start to happen once the two recordings are in the two separate ears, left and right, because he's like playing the preamps kind of like a DJ, right? And you can hear it like they open up, and then there's this phasing when they're mono, and then they pan around a bit and then go to the left and right. Then as you hear it start to go in and out of phase, you get this kind of like Haas effect where it hits first your left ear and then the right, and it sounds like the sound is coming from the left side as opposed to the right side, because that's how your ear determines the direction. Like if you snap your ears here, you know, the sound, just by virtue of the fact that sound is not as fast as light, will hit your right ear before your left ear, and you'll be like, hey, the sound is over here. And there's there's also the ear and your head occluding the sound will adjust the filtering. But yeah, so there's lots of different things happening here that you would normally never notice in a traditional composition. You'd normally never kind of notice these things. You normally never go into a sound that deeply, right? So this was in 1965, and Steve Reich went on to explore this phasing concept in other pieces. So this piece is called Clapping Music. This is another one of his most famous pieces, and a lot of his pieces, they're notated in this really cool way, where the actual notation will just be like one page of notation, and the idea is that through the repetition and overlap of these different patterns, we have one very, very simple pattern with slight changes, more complex patterns emerge. It's the same principle as a Moire pattern visually, right? Like if you look at a Moire pattern, let's go to videos and we'll just see what a Moire pattern is. A Moire pattern is when you have two very simple patterns that overlap and form an interference pattern.
Okay,
So,
let's go back to the rhombus pattern again.
let's see.
I hope you can see the rhombuses all right. I'm afraid there's some blocked places where it's got a little
Let's
worn,
see.
but that is indeed what it is.
Let's see.
Of course, you see,
here we go.
did these things all by hand. But what you probably can see is Moire patterns. Now, it's quite interesting because you can get one of them in the middle, say. It takes a little skill to do this, and I may have lost it because yeah. You have to move the thing at right angles to the where you want to move it, so it's tricky. I'm trying to get that spot in the middle. Now you see various lines going across. Those lines are the places where the patterns differ. Where they agree are the spaces in between. Now, there's another spot. Let's try that one. I'm not sure I'm getting any better at it. I think that the lines are further. Well, look, I'm going to cheat now. I'm going to.
Yeah, so you can see these Moire patterns kind of emerge as the repetition creates like an interference pattern as the phases line up.